So,
Exactly.
but that is, that is fair. That is a fair payback, and something which the soul in question would in fact want to impose upon itself, because when you die, when you end one life, there is a life review. But if you're in for any punishment, it's not somebody else or any other entity that is going to tell you what you do. You are going to realize what you did, and you are going to decide how you're going to learn what you've done and the seriousness of what you've done by being on the receiving end. But it's all very fair.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? I have had 8 kids, me and my wife, both from the same marriage. But out of the 8 kids, I had 1 or 2 of them when they're young, like 3, 4 years old, talking to imaginary friends and stuff like that. And that also seemed to disappear, if my memory is right, when they hit about 7 or 8 years old. Then all of a sudden they didn't have their imaginary friends. But one of my kids was so apt at talking to his imaginary friend. It was scary, but maybe he actually was. I don't know.
I mean, because children at that age, they're nearer to the spirit world than they are to the physical world, and so they can have say lifelong friends who still haven't really incarnated, but they can still contact them. They haven't really worked out whether he's incarnated or not. And it doesn't worry them. So sure, I mean, children who are talking to invisible friends, that shows that anyway they have a contact with the other dimension, shall we say, or let's say the visible, they have the invisible dimension, and it's perfectly normal. And this is where I really feel that there is a need to stimulate children, or at least to stimulate, to give them the opportunity of expressing this, because it could be immensely valuable. And in one particular field, for example, I mean, now we've all heard of musical prodigies, right? The classic is, of course, Mozart. But there are a number of amazing prodigies right now. And there's a girl in the UK called Alma Deutscher. Despite her name sounds German, but she is a British girl, and she composes music. She composes some classical music. Well, it sounds like classical music. And at the age of 7, she was already a virtuoso on the violin and the piano. And she'd written a little opera, and she'd written several piano sonatas. And by the time she was 9, she had written a full-length piano concerto and a full-length violin concerto, and it absolutely wows people. And at the age of 11, she had her first opera first performance in Vienna.
Oh, wow.
And if you look her up on YouTube, you can see her. Alma, A-L-M-A, Deutscher, D-E-U-T-S-H-E-R, I think it is. There's loads of clips of her, and she's so sweet, and she's so natural. But you cannot say that this is in her DNA. It's just not possible. When people say to her, you're a little Mozart," she says, "I'm not a little Mozart, I'm a little Alma." But you just cannot say that is genetics. It just ain't on,
Well, maybe she's reincarnation of somebody, who was great and she's carrying on.
I mean, I think, I honestly don't see how you could explain it in any other way. And because her parents are not, as far as I remember, they're not particularly musical, although they've become very keen on music since they discovered her talent. But and there are lots of there's also, I can't remember the name of the guy. There was also a guy who was who sort of turned out to be the reincarnation of a very famous baseball player. So it doesn't have to be, something in the arts. This guy was a reincarnation of this great baseball player, and he actually got to. I'm not really very much up on baseball, but anyway, he got to do the first pitch at the beginning of the season when he was about 7 or something, because everybody says, "Hey, this is so and so coming back," and all this. So it doesn't have to be things like musical prodigies. There are mathematical prodigies and physics prodigies. And all of this. I don't see how you can deny that it's not something that relates to learning that these little kids have had before.
Well, on our show last night, we were talking about a little tiny bit of energy, and how two negative energies could create a positive energy, and how two negatives could create something good and create something that's completely random, And
Yeah. That's kind of heavy, Kevin.
right?
But Gordon, what got you into writing this book, and why don't you tell us a little bit about your book? Just give us a little teaser there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why did I? Now this you guys, you're going to laugh, because I laughed myself when it happened. I had just finished writing a mega Trinity, I call it, of books about a lost civilization in Antarctica. And actually, I'd written the first draft of this in 1974 or 75, and I dug it out and went over it all over it again. I mean, we're not going to talk about that book now, but anyway, just to tell you that it exists. It's called Genesis Antarctica. And it sort of posits that the Garden of Eden was really in Antarctica.
Oh,
anyway,
you shouldn't have mentioned the A word on my show, because we have been talking lately so much about underground bases and Antarctica, underground cities, aliens, and all that stuff in Antarctica. So I mean, anytime you mention anything about Antarctica, my fans go crazy. I mean, it's a big thing.
There was a theory actually that Antarctica was actually actually a landmass originally.
Well, I read something here recently, Gordon, too. They were talking about it was maybe Atlantis, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Full of grass, full of greens, and it wasn't full of ice. How it is now.
Well, for a while yet. I think it won't be eventually.
Probably full of.
Let's get back to Kevin to Gordon about his book. Okay, Gordon. I'm sorry about that.
But anyway, that's another. As I say, you can find the website Genesis Antarctica, and you'll find out all about it. But anyway, so I just finished this mega work, which is 770 pages. That's quite a hefty doorstop, and then one day I got up and I sort of said penguins. And I thought, that's strange. Why did I say penguin? And then penguins? And, I said to my wife, look, I said, I don't think I'm going crazy, but for some reason I keep saying penguins. Don't know what it is. They're cute. Why I'm doing this, I don't know. Anyway, so I sort of started investigating penguins. I thought, okay, penguins. Somebody is trying to send me a message about penguins. And so I discovered quite a bit about penguins. And one of the first things I discovered was that there are 17 species. And that they're very different one from another. And I saw that there was like an evolutionary sort of ladder between the tiniest penguin, which is called a blue penguin, which is absolutely adorable, and all the way up to the emperor penguins, who actually, of course, do live on the big A. And then I thought, hey, this is interesting because they are you can see a progression here. You could imagine a penguin's soul evolving through these different species and sort of getting better and more advanced or learning more, etc. And anyway, the long and the short of it is that I decided to write a series of stories for children, ostensibly for children, about a single penguin soul to whom I gave the name of Pengos, P-E-N-G-O-S. And this little Pengos starts out as being a little blue penguin, and then works all his way up through the 7 different lives until he becomes an emperor. And in the course of these incarnations as different types of penguins, it learns different types of things. And so I thought, right, so this is an interesting way of children being introduced to the subject of reincarnation. Now, for the moment, I didn't go any further. Well, I thought, okay, let's see, and over the period of, 2 or 3 months, I wrote these stories. And then I thought, now that's interesting. This could be a means of opening up children's minds to the idea of reincarnation. And as they are at the age during which they will have their own memories of previous lives, it might encourage them to come out with something that could be useful for themselves and maybe even indicate some of the things that they already know but don't really realize it, and perhaps even discover what their purpose of life in this incarnation might be. So I had my 7 stories, more or less, tied up. But then, of course, I realized that I needed to, put some other material around it, because you just couldn't push it into parents' hands and say, here are these books, read them the stories and see what happens. So around the stories there came questions to ask, to nudge the children into maybe revealing something that they had remembered but didn't really want to talk about or were afraid of talking about. So, and onto that, there's a whole section of articles explaining reincarnation to parents in sort of short little articles that are easy to absorb. And anyway, it has now evolved into a 2-book set. There's a book for the grown-ups, which contains the stories and the articles and things to look for and things like that. And then there's a second book the first book is in black and white for the parents. And then there is a second book in full color with lots of extra penguins and illustrations for the children so they can read the stories on their own afterwards. And so that's and as I said before, the title of this is Another Egg, Another Life.
Oh wow! How are people responding to your book on it?
I mean, so far we've done it's only just been published. I when I started it, I thought it was just going to be a filler, between Genesis Antarctica and the sequel. And I thought, oh, well, this is just a cute idea. It's a little bit lighter. It's going to take me, maybe a couple of months. That was a year and a half ago. We've done some trials. We've done some with various people, and some of them have been very, very interesting. Others have been non-conclusive. But we had, and this is really quite interesting, we had a recent case in the UK of a little girl. A friend of mine heard about this little girl who had been walking down the street and pointed to a piece of land and to her and said, "Mummy, look at that white house. Oh, and look, and here comes the postman with his funny cap on, with a funny peak on it, there was no house there.
Oh, wow.
So, and my friend James heard about this, and he did a bit of research and discovered that there had been a White House there up